My name is Peter Cole Perkins, and I'm 84 years old, born July 7th, 1940, and lifelong resident of Boxford. And I've had many careers over the years. I started my own business when I got out of school. Construction business, building homes. I built all over New England. And then I had an opportunity to, from a fairly large company, to basically run everything from the ground up, construction superintendent. And so I did take that job, and I built, again, homes, mostly in Massachusetts for them. Apartments and condominiums, a lot of them in Hampton and Salisbury. And then I had the opportunity in, I would have to double check on that, but I believe 1995, I had the opportunity to become Boxford's first full-time fire chief. And I did that up until February of 2006, when I retired. It was a mandatory retirement from the state at 65 years old. And those are some of the things I did in my career. And fire department was a large part of it, because I was on the Boxford Fire Department for 45 years. And most of it as a call firefighter. And I started out as a firefighter, and then to lieutenant, captain, deputy chief for 10 years, and fire chief for 13 years. And that time in 2006, the town wanted me to stay on a couple more years on the fire department as chief, and they were going to do a home rule petition and petition the state. And I did a lot of checking around, and it was not a popular thing for a fire chief to do. So I told the Board of Selectmen at that time that I would choose to retire for those reasons.
That's excellent. All right. We'll start a little bit with childhood. Starting with, how close were you with your neighbors in your town?
Quite close with the neighbors. And Boxford was a lot different then. You had party lines where if you picked up the telephone, a regular handheld cord type telephone, you could hear your neighbors talking. If you heard them talking, you would hang up. If it was an important call, you'd say, "I need the phone," and they would hang up, and you could use a phone, especially if it was an emergency. We knew all of our neighbors, and being a small town, you just didn't have any fears. I mean, kids would go out and play all day. You would ride your bike all over town and not think a thing of it. And a lot of times your parents didn't know where you were from morning till night until it was time to go in and have dinner. And so Boxford has remained a lot the way it was in the past, but yet a lot of things from my childhood have changed. We lived at an excellent time period when I was a child.
Do you wish there were some things that hadn't changed from when you were younger?
I would say probably one of the most frustrating things in town right now is probably traffic.
Yeah.
And traffic, it had to happen, it has happened, and with cell phones and everyone directing people to the shortest routes, we get a lot of traffic through town on 133 Main Street, Ipswich Road, and a lot of the larger trucks come through town to avoid traffic, but also depending on what they're hauling, they don't have to go through scales on I-95 and places like that. So that's one big change. I think the 2-acre zoning has been wonderful. But going back to my childhood, you would think nothing of going to your neighbors' houses, whether they were a half-mile apart or a mile apart, and just stopping there, because everyone was friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any games you remember playing with other kids, or any like specific spots in town you guys would go to hang out in?
Absolutely. We used to, right over here at the Colby House, where it is now the open park area, and we would go to the Colby's house or someone else's house, most of the time the Colby's, and 5 or 6 of us guys would play 45s. And 45s, I didn't know it at that time, but it was more of a local game and not a nationwide game or a state game. And we'd play 45s, and if it was raining, we would play football, backyard football, ride bicycles, and as we got a little bit older, we would, you might say, hang around the West Village, sit on the monument where the cannons are.
That's nice. Do you have any notable friends for your childhood, maybe people who've kept in touch for a long time?
There are a few friends that have stayed in touch, especially my cousins. I've stayed in touch with them. A lot of people, after they graduated from either high school or college, moved on. I do hear from them now and then, and I try to stay in touch with as many of my childhood friends as I can.
Did you have any summer jobs growing up around here?
Any what?
Summer jobs.
That was a big thing when I was growing up. Most of the kids worked, whether it be male or female. Kids worked at Benson's ice cream stand, Paisley's, Chadwick's Farms, and I happened to work on Brook Road, which is a quarter mile from here, and I worked there every summer from the time I was probably in the 8th grade right up through high school. It was a very, I'm going to say prosperous farm at the time, growing all kinds of vegetables, tomatoes, corn, peas, cucumbers, strawberries were a big thing, and also taking care of the animals, going out at the end of the day, calling the animals in, the cows, so that they could be milked. So that was a big part of my childhood and everyone else's childhood at that time. A lot of people worked at Inglesby farms, and I also worked at the Nason Stonehouse farm for many years working with chickens. And the surprising part is after all these years of working with chickens, I still have about 36 chickens of my own.
Were there any major events that happened annually or periodically in your community, like festivals or parades or anything?
Growing up, one of the big events town-wide was July 4th. And you would, most of the events at that time took place in back of the Aaronwood School, and then the Cole School was built. And at that time, things kind of slowed down as far as the festivities that took place behind the Cole School, because that took up so much of the land. But on July 4th was a big time, the parade, kids going out and playing games. they had the haystack where you would pull the hay apart and get change. Change at that time was a big thing. Three-legged race, the egg throwing contest. Women always used to get involved in the egg throwing contest, and naturally there were some eggs that were not hard-boiled, and that was always great to watch the eggs breaking. But so July 4th was always a big thing. And then another thing, they used to have the Grange and the American Legion. They used to hold things in the Lincoln Hall, and they would do things like auctions, vegetable auctions, dinners, and things such as that. A lot of those things still happen today. July 4th still happens. We have the parade. This year was a great parade, and it's just that builds the community spirit.
Do you think that the town community has changed? Like, do you think that people are more or less connected than they used to be?
More what?
More or less connected than they used to be?
Definitely less connected. Unfortunately, a lot of that is because a lot of people don't communicate today other than by text or email. And if I'm talking with someone, I like to be able to talk with them, to see their expression. When we had to go to Zoom years ago, I did not like that, only because you do not or cannot run a meeting like you can when you're sitting around a table or at a good meeting. And I did get used to it because we had to do it so many times. I had a Zoom meeting yesterday on the select board, and it worked out fine. I guess you might say you get used to these things, but you can't be meeting in person, and so that has changed a lot.
Yeah. What was school like for you? The classes and the teachers?
That was I'm going to say, an enjoyable part of going to school. I started my schooling in the Moss Library, which was a school, and I went there probably up until about the 6th grade. The teachers were very strict. You would not think of saying anything out of turn to a teacher. And I know a few people might have tried that, and it didn't, that wouldn't continue because the teachers were in control. After I left the Moss Grammar School, I went down to the Aaron Wood School, and I think that was probably 7th and 8th grade. Maybe the 7th grade. Then the Harry Lee Cole School was built, and I went to the rest of the year at the new Cole School. And then the kids from West Boxford were bused to North Andover to high school, and then the kids from the east end of town went to either Topsfield or Danvers. And it was kind of interesting because my mother, who was a lifelong resident of Boxford, she went to North Andover High School, but my older sister was bused to Punchard, which is in Andover. So it's hard to say why it switched from North Andover to Andover for a few years, then back to North Andover. So it was a different experience leaving Boxford, going to an outside school, but yet met a lot of new friends, which I still have in North Andover. My wife, I met her in high school, and so that was a plus going to North Andover. I never would have met her.
Yeah. What were the extracurriculars and sports in high school for you? And maybe some of the school events that you went to?
In grammar school, there was just recess, and everyone always enjoyed recess. In high school, I went out for track and football, but it was difficult living in Boxford. And if you didn't have a ride home, you would have to walk home. And so that wasn't quite the same. I did not do that my senior year in high school.
What was the playground equipment like in elementary school, and like what kind of games did you play?
In elementary school, there were swings. That was it. There were swings, and you did not have any other type of equipment. We didn't need any other type of equipment because we would play ball or kickball, and it just, that is the way we grew up. We didn't know anything else as far as outside sports. As my kids went to school, things were a lot different as far as the equipment and the athletics. My wife and I always involved our kids in sports. When soccer started in Boxford, I was one of the ones that initially was involved with that. I coached soccer all the way through elementary school with my children and even into high school, and I coached many other sports for my kids. Was hockey and baseball and track. My daughter was a good track runner, went to University of Maine, Orono, on a scholarship for running. My two boys were both very involved with wrestling and soccer. My youngest son was a state champ on wrestling, and both of them were involved very heavily right up through the state with soccer. And so, going back to your initial question, we did not have really any equipment as far as sports go, or just the swings.
What kind of technology did you have growing up?
Meaning technology as far as computers?
Yeah, like telephone, radio, television, like how much was technology involved when you were younger?
Very little. As a child, I remember my parents listening to the radio. At night you would listen to the radio. They would listen to stories on the radio. And I don't remember all of the shows, but there was one on there. I think it was The Green Doors, and it was a mystery show on the radio. And so most of the communications came from a radio. You didn't go out of town much as far as activities. I remember when I saw my first television, and my neighbors who lived up in the back of our house, they had a very, very small house. There were 6 children in the house. It was an incredibly small house. They had a television. It was a 12-inch black and white television, and it was just, I would never forget it. It was just amazing to see pictures on a television or to see a movie on television. Short time after that, we got a television, was naturally black and white, and everything has changed since then.
Was there any notable pop culture from when you were growing up, like movies or musicians?
I always used to love just listening to music on the radio, and naturally when I got my first car when I was 16 years old. You know, you could listen to tapes and the radio. So, but that was about it growing up.
What kind of cars did people have? Like maybe what was your first car that you had?
My first car was a 49 Ford, and I had 49 Mercury, and then I bought a 55 Ford convertible, which was probably one of my favorite cars. And so most of my friends, as I was growing up, 16, 17, 18 years old, they all had their cars, but it was very inexpensive at the time.
Yeah.
And I know in 1940, I brought a small book with me, and it's all the different prices in the 1940s. And gas was 11 cents a gallon. And when I was 16 years old, 17 years old, you could put $1 worth of gas in your car, 25 cents a gallon, and you could ride around town or drive and not even think about the cost.
How did you learn to drive when you were younger?
Working on a farm. And working on a farm, you were driving the farm's trucks, not big trucks, driving the tractors, and that was a big part of the job. When I was a child, farmers didn't think about insurance or liability. You just worked on a farm and you did everything they told you, whether it was working with a pitchfork, pitching hay, or working out in the sun. I remember one time working at Gemmel's farm. It was probably around 1958, I don't know exactly. There was a bad hurricane that came through, and we stayed out in the strawberry patch picking through a good part of that hurricane. Finally, we went in the house. They gave us dinner, which they usually didn't do, and we were eating dinner, and the chimney actually blew right off the house.
Oh gosh.
Which house was that?
That was Gemmel's farm. George and Helena Gemmel.
Right here.
Yep, and that was probably part of one of the most enjoyable parts of my childhood.
Did that still have that big tower on it then?
It had a big barn, and then you could, and it was attached, similarly attached to the house, and that's where the milk room was, and a big cooler. So when the cows were milked, they would put the milk in the cooler, and then it would go to market. And then George Gemmel or Jimmy Gemmel, their son, would go to Boston every morning and take the vegetables all into the market. And what we would do is the day before we would prepare everything, wash tomatoes, cucumbers, make them shiny, and pack them in like bushel boxes or half pack boxes, and they would go into the market that way.
So where were there fields for the gardens then?
They were all around the farm, right up to the Brookside Cemetery. The farmland went right out to Glendale Road. And then there was a long, that's where I actually learned to drive a tractor very good. There was a long trail that went up over the hill and where the power line is now, and when you would be up on top of that steep hill and you were able to actually look down at 133. And there were not that many trees there then. And so it probably took you 20-25 minutes on a tractor with a trailer on it to drive up that hill, and that's where they used to grow most of their tomatoes.
Were there any notable things about getting married? Like where did you get married?
There was, and growing up in town, I was Protestant. I went to the Second Congregational Church and Sunday school, and as a young child, and then when I went to North Andover, I met my wife, and she was, I'm not going to say from the city, but a different atmosphere than Boxford. And so when we got married in 1962. We got married at St. Michael's Church in North Andover. My wife was Catholic, I was Protestant, and that's where we got married. And then we had our reception in the VFW in North Andover. And being a Protestant, not a Catholic, I remember we had to get married in the front of the church inside, but I was not allowed to go right up to the pulpit part of the church.
Interesting. What about starting a family in Boxford? Like, what was it like sending kids to school here?
It was very simple. My wife always worked in nursing homes, and so a lot of times she would work nights. The bus would always pick you right up at my children. It would pick you right up at your house, and it would drop you off. And you always watched your children, but you were not as concerned as you are today with something happening to your kids. But I do remember very distinctly, one morning my wife had to go to work early. I went to work. The kids went out to the bus stop, 3 of my children, my daughter and my 2 boys, and there were other kids in the neighborhood. They went to the bus stop, and after we went to work, the kids did not get on the bus. And they went sliding on a big hill, Baines Hill, in back of my house on Main Street. And my wife came home, and the kids weren't there. And she got very concerned and panicked, and she called the school, and the school said the kids never showed up. And so then she called the police department, and at that time there were really there was actually one cruiser that would be available, and Douglas Warren was the police chief at that time. And so they started to investigate and came to the house, and a good friend of ours, the police chief at that time, Doug Warren, said to Richard Cunningham, who was a DPW worker, he said, would her kids ever skip school or be picked up? And Richard said no, and then my wife got really nervous. Well, come to find out, the kids showed up in the backyard, and it all worked out. That never happened again.
How were you involved with the community as an adult?
As a what?
As an adult?
I was always involved in the community, even as a young person. Cleanup day was a big time. We'd come to the village up here, we would clean up everything. As an adult, I was very, very involved with the town. Meaning coaching every sport. My wife also coached girls softball. So coaching was a big part of what I did. 1961, I joined the fire department and every Monday night was a training night. You just got used to that, and it was just Monday night, you went to fire department training. And I did that basically right up until 2006 when I retired. And I was always involved with the town as far as the beach, swimming lessons, and my grandparents, I lived on Main Street at 298 Main Street. My grandparents lived right across the street, Harry and Ethel Cole, and they were, my grandparents were a very, very big part of the town, and so I spent a lot of time at their house. If I wasn't home, I would be at my grandparents' house across the street, and I would spend a lot of time with my grandmother when I was a young child, helping her cook. She did braiding rugs, hooked rugs. She taught me how to do things like that. And I know that, like on Fridays, the fish man would come to the house, and she would buy these little smelts, and I would help her clean the smelts, and if I cleaned the smelts, then I could keep the spawn and cook that, and because that was a delicacy. And so that was a big part of my life. My grandparents, I would help my grandfather, Harry Cole. His business was cutting wood, fence posts, cedar fence posts, and he owned what is now Wildcat and many other woodlots. So that's a big part of what he did, plus farming. I would, sometimes he'd had corn. He was very big in growing potatoes, so I would help him sometimes dig the potatoes. But the corn there was a field right next to where my house is now on Main Street and Maple Avenue. And he was a very interesting individual. He had a different sense of humor, and he would, I would take a bag, burlap bag of corn out of the field, come back in, he'd be gone. All of a sudden I'd hear, "Where are you, boy?" And he was hiding on me. He would go to another part of the field to pick corn. So he was an interesting character. I wished I had have asked him more at the time about his childhood and all that. And I think a lot of the kids today, and I wished I'd done that with many people, with my other grandparents, and because so many people today don't know about the past or their parents or their grandparents. So, but I had a great childhood, and having your grandparents right across the street was a big deal. And if you had the opportunity, you would go to one of your grandparents and stay overnight.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what would you have asked, like, what questions would you have asked your grandparents if you could ask them now, and if you were to ask those questions of yourself, how would you answer them?
I try and keep, I won't say try, I keep diaries of what I do, and I try to keep my kids informed of what I do, what I've done, things like that. And I wished I knew more about, especially my father's childhood. His father passed away when he was very young, and so I didn't know much about his childhood. And his grandmother and mother lived up on Oak Ridge Road, the last house in Boxford where the Bergstroms lived. And so I spent a lot of I would ride my bike from Main Street at Coles Pond up there, and you wouldn't even think a thing of it. And
At what age?
I spent a lot of time up there at that farm. And again, they were not as big into the vegetables as that, but they had greenhouses and they grew a lot of plants. And so that was an interesting farm also.
What were their names?
It was Gardner, Charles Gardner. He's buried in Brookside Cemetery. And then my grandmother's name was Buzzell, Evelyn Buzzell, and related to the Richardson family. And the Richardsons used to live on Valley Road. Then they bought the house where the church has their parsonage over here, and they turned it into a nursing home. It was a nursing home for many years when I was 17, 18 years old, and they finally had to close it because of state regulations. The building wasn't sprinkled and it wasn't set up the way it should be for a nursing home. So, but that was the Buzzells, the Richardsons, and the Gardners, but they were big into the floral part of it, meaning the greenhouses and the great big oil-fired steam boilers in the greenhouses.
Kind of going back to like your experience as a firefighter, what was the training process like to become a firefighter?
I was always interested in the fire department. When I was, I'm going to say 8, 10, 12 years old, there were not as many trees, and if there was a fire, they would ring the church bell next door here, and they had a, I think it was a 1946 Ford truck. There was, at one point, there was only one truck up there. Did not have a muffler on it, and at my house, I could either hear the church bell or I could hear that loud fire truck coming down the road. And a lot of times, either on my bicycle, mostly on my bicycle, I would follow the truck, and so that's one of the ways I became interested in the fire department. As I became older, 14, 15 years old, I used to go up to the fire station up here. At that time, it was also part of the DPW. There was an old blacksmith shop there, and that's where the Department of Public Works worked out of. It was a dark, dingy place where it was a blacksmith shop. It was had high ceilings, and so I would go up there, and there was a gentleman who used to sit there during the winter time, and he would sit in front of the wood stove, and he would paint the signs, road signs in Boxford by hand, and then put them back up in the spring. And so as soon as I basically was almost old enough, I joined the fire department and became very active in it as far as a column member. And then I remember when we were going to build a new fire station down here, we burned down the old fire station. And it hit national news because people don't usually burn down their fire station. And so that was very interesting. Laws changed a lot, so when we built the East Fire Station, that had to be torn down.
That was actually kind of a thing in Boxford for a long time, like if a house was condemned, the fire department would burn it down as a training exercise, right?
We burned a lot of houses in Boxford, and we burned up on Dole Hill. We burned that house down, and the one on the corner of Main and Middleton, I actually have a picture of that house with me, and we burned that time. We burned probably, I'll say we probably burned 7, 8 houses down, and it was probably the best training you could ever get. But now, and it's been that way for many years, and even when I was fire chief, you could not do that because of the asphalt shingles or the asbestos and all that. So when that law came into effect, we would go with artificial smoke in houses, and that was good, but you did not get the training. Now, naturally, and it's a big plus with the fire academies and the training you get there, I'm going to say it's probably more than equal to what we had.
What about the trailers that they, bring in sometimes with the...
The smokehouse, that is an excellent training tool for the children. That's brought in every July 4th. It's set up at the East Station at 6 Middleton Road. And it gives the children an opportunity to go in and experience what smoke is like. It's non-toxic. The kids they go in it, they get down low, they crawl underneath the smoke, and they find a fire exit where they go out and down a small ladder. So that's a big part of training. And one of the things I used to like the most about fire department was the training and training new firefighters. It was just so interesting, and then we got into the EMS part of it, the medical part of it, and that was a shock to quite a few firefighters at that time. And we did have some firefighters leave because they didn't want to get into the medical part of it. But that's something that you had to do because that is the way fire departments across the country have changed. In Boxford alone, 75–80% of our calls are medical related, whether it's car accidents or just medical related. So the fire departments have changed dramatically. We used to have a lot of woods fires. We used to have an awful lot of car fires up on Barker Road, up by the Fire Corner Golf Course. And it was, you could go to 8 or 10 car fires in a month up there, and it was just part of the job.
Like
and
cars set on fire?
What, the cars what?
Set on fire?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cars would be stolen, they would set them on fire. And it got so bad that they actually put a gate on each end of Barker Road and not the end of her and at the Fire Corner Golf Course.
Oh, that was why they closed it?
Yeah, and that basically ended that area for burned cars. And now and then you'd have a car fire at up near Johnson's Pond, because that was Lakeshore Road was very quiet then. And sometimes you would have a car fire up in Bald Hill because someone would drive a car up in there. And if they stole the car, they'd go up in there and then they'd burn it. But the fire department has changed a lot in that respect. And I will have to say, and it was all to the best, meaning it was hard for a lot of people to become EMTs, and it's still a continuing thing even today, meaning as far as ambulance response. And I am presently on a committee right now that is investigating the response, the ambulance response, and timetables and all that.
What was the most, 1 or 2 memorable fires that you remember going to?
Probably one right across the street at the Frizzell House. I happened to be working in Andover at that time. It was at night. I got the call there was a fire. I responded. Came in here. I went in through an upstairs window, and the garage was fully involved. And I went in, and with a crew, a beam came down and hit the front of my helmet. My helmet spun out the window. And so having a helmet on, I wasn't seriously injured. I went to the hospital, discharged, but we saved the house, and some damage to the house, but not major. The two other significant calls was the Nason bonfire. That was a set fire. Some boys from Haverhill, they were burning barns down around the area. They burned a barn down up on Oak Ridge Road. I know they burned down some in Haverhill and Georgetown. They were caught. Man that lives adjacent to Nason barn saw them doing it. He chased them and got their number plate, and they were arrested, and I won't mention their names. And they, because one of them was involved with a dignitary from Haverhill, they were punished, not severely, but they were punished. But the good part is the bonfires ended. One of the craziest calls I ever went on was the explosion on Herrick Road. I happened to be at my home the day that happened. I was in front of my garage, and all of a sudden there was just this loud explosion, and my garage doors, I could see them just vibrating. And my immediate response is, it must have been a plane that blew up. I looked up, didn't see anything. And I thought, maybe it's something that blew up in my house. I went to the back of my house very quickly. And nothing. So then I went back out to my fire vehicle and got my handheld radio, called the communication center, and said, what is it, what's happening, what's going on? They said, stand by. So I got in my vehicle, and I just sat at my top driveway waiting to go left or right. They came on, said where the explosion was, and it was on Herrick Road. I went to Herrick Road, and the house was totally gone. And at that time there was a couple people there. The homeowner was there. He was working with a backhoe, and he was working in the front of his house. He was digging right next to the house, and he hit the gas line, and it broke off inside the house at the meter. And so, not being an experienced backhoe operator, experienced backhoe operator would have dug down deeper, pulled the line out, and it would have vented into the air. He did not know that, and he wouldn't have known that, so he went in the house, and he got his grandmother out of the house, took her down over a bank over in the back of the house behind the building. He went back in, opened up all his windows and doors, went out, called the gas company, and I believe while he was talking on the phone, it blew. He was standing about 8 feet away from the foundation, but the foundation came up probably about 3 feet above the ground, and the explosion went up over him and out. He had a few cuts and bruises on him. He was not seriously hurt. It broke windows for almost a half a mile around. The carrying stick, the main beam of the house, went up in the air, and it was in the next person's yard, stuck in the ground like a great big toothpick. And there was interior doors up in the pine trees. There was, people told me that there was debris as far away as Georgetown, insulation in different parts of the house. So it was a major explosion. And so there was the good part was, no one was injured, seriously. And the house was rebuilt, but the gas company responded and we extinguished what was left in the basement of the house. The rest of the house was just all over the place. And so it was an unbelievable experience, but yet it all ended well, and a contractor bought the lot and built another house there. One of the big things about the fire department is having so many miles of I-95. Some of the horrible accidents you have there. One of the big improvements in the last 2 years between the select board and the state and Chief Ryder, we got those protective rails all the way up and down I-95, which prevents vehicles from crossing over and having head-on collisions. So that was a big plus.
That was good. Do you have any other specific questions?
What do you feel like you might know about Boxford that most people wouldn't know?
That's a tough question. I find that people do get out in the woods and they do a lot of sports now, but and there's a lot that goes on in town, like the Council on Aging, and that's where I was today. I cook for the Council on Aging when they have their cookouts, and so that is good. There are things that happen in town, but everyone's lives are a lot different today, meaning it's hard to get everything into a day or a week, and so the pace is a lot busier today, a lot more hectic, and you see this with people driving. People just, if a light turns green, if you don't move immediately, they'll blow a horn. People are a lot more uptight today and not as relaxed and enjoying life as much as to its fullest. And so that's a change, I see. As far as the town, I've noticed a big change recently, and a lot of it because of my age. A lot of the people that I grew up with or were friendly with have moved on in different ways. Either passed on and or moved to a different area. And that is something that is just a part of life, and you enjoy what you have while you have. Yeah? And let me see if there's anything else in particular that I wanted to mention. I did bring a few things that I'll leave with you, just on my family, a little bit of just history on me growing up in Boxford. And other than that, I can't think of anything.
I had one question about Wildcat. Do you know anything about the wolf pit?
I do.
Tell us. I'm so curious.
And I find that a little frustrating, because if you walk in the main trail, and I used to spend a lot of time in Wildcat, and when my grandfather owned it, we rode snowmobile through there all the time, and I was in there with him doing things. But you go in off of Ipswich Road, there's an entrance in there. My sister used to live in that house, and there's an entrance there where probably 1% of the population might use that entrance because there's really no place to park there. And if you go in there and you just go right straight, you're going up a hill on the right-hand side. It's about 8 foot long and about that wide, and it's bounded by stones. My grandfather told me that that was an Indian grave. Everyone that I've heard says that it's a wolf pit. So what it is, I don't know. It's the way it's laid out with the rocks. It looks more like a grave. And on the if you go in that same entrance and you go right, and there's a dugout on the left there, and I think that says wolf pit. Oh, maybe it did say wolf pit.
Yeah.
That would make more sense to me that that was the wolf pit. But it would be interesting to have an archaeologist or someone actually look at those rocks and say, yes, this is what it is. But it does absolutely look like a grave.
That's what I was wondering because, you know, I've known that it was called the Wolf Pit, but if you actually read any historical materials on Boxford, I've never seen anything actually historical that says there was a wolf pit there.
Right.
There was one up somewhere around Baldpate,
Yes. Yeah.
but not there. So I was just wondering what your take on that was, but I've never heard that from what your grandfather said, so that's really
Yeah.
interesting. But he didn't mention why he thought that, did he?
No, and that's where, you know, when you're a kid, you don't think of asking your grandparents questions that you should ask them. And although I did ask my grandmother a lot more questions because she just was always cooking. One of the interesting things where the West Fire Station is now, I was with my grandmother one day, Grandmother Cole, and it was a old Ford sedan that had the separate windshields, so a piece of glass, and it had a rumble seat in it. One of my sisters was in the back seat, my grandmother was driving. There was a turtle crossing the road. My grandmother swerved, she missed the turtle, she hit a great big elm tree, and I went through the windshield, and then when I came back through, they said that's when I did all the damage to my neck and my face and my tongue. And she never drove again, and they did take the elm tree down. But I remember that though where it used to be like a DPW area, one of the Cunninghams and another gentleman put me in their father's brand new dump truck, took me to Georgetown to a doctor there, and he looked at me and said, I can't do anything for him, and they took me to the Hale Hospital, and I spent a week there, and but it was that was the last time my grandmother drove, and it was something that I didn't remember until naturally in the hospital when I woke up, but I never remember a thing about it. So other than that, you know, I can't think of, you know, I could think of a million things about Boxford, but nothing right off the top of my head.
Can you talk about your grandfather's influence in town? He was sort of politically connected, and he was known by just about everybody.
They called him Mr. Boxford, and they called him Mr. Boxford, and he was a select board member. He started young in his 20s, and I believe he was selectman for 65 years. He was chairman of the board for many years. He was on many different boards. He was fence viewing. He was on a lot of different committees, and he was very, in my opinion, influential in the way Boxford stayed the way it was. There was the Pearlies, the Coles, and there were the Chadwicks. They were all just so involved. So I always looked at my grandmother Cole, my grandfather Cole. I always looked very highly upon them as far as what they did. My grandfather always would come up here, and he was like an auctioneer over at Lincoln Hall. And knowing how slow he talked and everything, he could just rattle things off so quickly, and he was a good auctioneer. And so when I retired from the fire department, and Monday night was always a night that I was out, I took almost a year off after I retired from fire department. I was doing outside small jobs, carpentry, and I thought, I'm going to run for selectman. And I ran, and successful, and I never intended that I would remain on the board as long as I did. I'll be in May. It will have been 15 years, and that will probably end my career. And it's changed from the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board, and the Select Board. I think that the people in town, the volunteers for all different committees, whether it's finance, planning board, select board, garden club, all these different organizations. It is just amazing how the town is run and how well it's run with all volunteers. And people wouldn't realize, sometimes people get a little upset if they don't have an immediate answer. But when you think about the way the town is run with its volunteers and everything, it is very impressive. And I've been glad to be a part of it. My wife, she's always volunteered at different things. I know back years ago when the fire department was strictly called, there was a group of ladies that would get together. If it was a big fire, woods fire, they would get together, they would make sandwiches, they would bring it to the scene. And so things have changed that way. But yet, all in all, as I drive around Boxford, and I do like seeing the open fields, and I grew up, every day I would be in the woods or a field, outdoors playing. And so that was a fortunate part of anyone my age or 20 years younger or whatever. It was just a different childhood, and very fortunate for it.
Did you get poison ivy a lot?
What's that?
Did you get poison ivy a lot?
I never got poison ivy, and I still don't today. Ticks, that's a different story. When I was growing up until maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, you didn't see ticks. But you didn't see deer either. I mean, today, you see deer just about everywhere. The other day I was coming back from a clam box, coming through Topsfield, and there was a deer standing on someone's front step. I couldn't believe it. I turned around and came back. The deer was at the back door, and it was a house. There was no fence around it or anything like that. So the deer was just downtown in Topsfield, and so that's changed a lot. And mosquitoes are not near as bad as they used to be. And mosquitoes years ago used to be horrible. They're not as bad right now, and probably I don't know why, but I've noticed that And so that is, that's a little bit of my childhood. I may have talked too much, but,
Never.
and you've spent, how many years have you spent in Boxford?
Almost 70.
Yeah,
I'm almost 80, so it's almost 70.
yeah,
I lived away for a few years.
you did, yeah? And you've seen a lot of changes.
I've seen the same Boxford that you have seen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It,
A lot of the same experiences.
yeah, very fortunate.
Yeah.
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 So right now, I do not plan on making any immediate changes. And I built my house in 1963, and we planned on staying there until we could build a bigger house. And I told my wife when we moved in, I said, if our taxes ever reach $1,000, we're moving. And we won't mention what they are now. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.